Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's event with Nicole May Goldberg and Aimee Molloy. I have I'm Helen Soslowski, I'm from Oblong Books. I have, unfortunately, some bad news that Nicole May Goldberg is unable to join us tonight because her internet went out. So we are, all of us, unfortunately, dependent, there we go, on internet. And here we go. So joining us this evening is just Aimee Molloy with Carol Goodman. And I will introduce Carol and then hand it off to her to start the conversation this evening. Carol is the author of 21 novels, including The Lake of Dead Languages and The Seduction of Water, which won the 2003 Hammett Prize, and The Widow's House, which won the 2018 Mary Higgins Clark Award. Her books have been translated into 16 languages. She lives in the Hudson Valley with her family and teaches literature and writing at the New School and SUNY New Pulse. And her 2019 novel, The Night Visitors, also won the 2020 Mary Higgins Clark Award. Congratulations, Carol.
Thank you.
Hi, Aimee. Hi, Carol. It's a pleasure to have you join us. I'm going to butt out now and have you guys take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Oblong. It's always great to do an event with Oblong. Welcome, Aimee. It's great to have you here virtually.
So thanks for having me. I know I wish we were in the store, like drinking champagne.
I wish we were too, but we'll this will be fun too. So let me introduce Aimee Molloy. Aimee Molloy is the author of the biography "However Long the Night: Molly Melching's Journey to Help Millions of African Women and Girls Triumph." Her debut novel, The Perfect Mother, was a New York Times bestseller and has been translated into more than 20 languages. Her new novel, Goodnight Beautiful, I have it here, is an irresistible psychological thriller featuring a newly married woman whose life is turned upside down when her husband goes missing. It is a thrilling tale of domestic suspense that questions assumptions and defies expectations, showcasing Molloy's deft ability to subvert norms. The novel culminates in the kind of stunning twist that is becoming her trademark. So many twists that we are going to try to have a conversation about this book without giving away things and spoiling the twists and secrets that are in it. So welcome, Aimee. Would you like to start by just telling us a little bit about the book?
Yeah. And like you said, it's, I've been doing a bunch of events and I feel like the whole event is always about like, we can't really talk about this book, but so at its core, Goodnight Beautiful is about a newlywed couple named Sam and Annie who meet in New York. They have this whirlwind romance. They decide to get married after just a few months, and then they leave the city and they move upstate to a small, quaint town where Sam had grown up in order to take care of his mother, who was just put into a long-term care facility for dementia. And he's a therapist, and he decides that he's going to open a private practice of seeing patients. And he really wants to, he opens a home office. And although he doesn't know it, there's a vent in the ceiling through which every word can be heard, of his sessions from a bedroom upstairs. And so his clientele is a lot of females who have, Sam had a reputation when he was younger of being like the stud of the town and, the heartbreaker. Everybody called him the heartbreaker. And so there's a lot of women who are, kind of developing personality disorders just to get an appointment with this new therapist. And so little does he know that upstairs, everything is being heard. And so eventually, sort of raises the question in that situation, would you listen into people's therapy sessions? And so in this case, the answer is yes. And eventually attractive young patient shows up and, has an interest in Sam, and then he goes missing. And so, that is the plot of the book. I think it's not necessarily what the book is about, but it's that is the plot of the book. And so Annie then struggles to figure out, was her husband the philanderer that everybody in town thinks he was, or is there something else happening about his disappearance?
Right. Lots of secrets to tease out and themes that we can talk about as we go forward. Why don't we, could you read us there's that first chapter that's so
Sure.
just to give us a taste of what we're in store for.
Rare words, and it's sexy. So if like my parents are here, even now would be a good time to mute me. Chapter 1. That ass. It's incredible. An ass so perfect, there's no way Sam can pull his eyes away as he walks half a block behind her up the hill, past the cheese shop, the bookstore, the lauded new wine place with the bright red door. He pretends to browse the table of American flags, half off at Hoyt's Hardware, as she approaches the parlor, the upscale small plate restaurant that opened 3 months ago. A man on his way in behind his wife holds the door open for her, lingers to catch a glimpse of her from the back, no doubt praying his wife doesn't see. Like Sam said, that ass. The restaurant took over the space once occupied by 2 generations of Finnerty dentists, the brick facade replaced by a sleek glass wall. Sam pauses in front of it, watching her cross the room and sit at the bar. Linen blazer off, drink ordered. She takes a book from her bag, her shoulder blades rising like the wings of a bird under a thin white tank top, as he passes, stopping to look at the listings in the window of the realtor's office. Exactly 9 minutes he waits, long enough for her to be nearing the end of her drink, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline as he loosens his tie and turns around. Game on. The door to the parlor opens as Sam approaches, releasing an air-conditioned gust into the humid evening air. Dr. Statler! A patient is standing in front of him, and he has to hunt for her name. She's an artist. Started 2 weeks ago. Caroline, Catherine, Sam says. Fuck. What absolutely never happened to him back in New York happens all the time here. Running into patients on the street, in the grocery store. Yesterday at the gym, where Sam ran 3 miles on the treadmill, while Lisa Chow, the newly divorced humanities professor with a history of anxiety, worked the elliptical, and it makes him feel off balance every time. How are you? He says. I'm good. Catherine Walker. She's a well-known painter in New York, moved here a few months ago. This is Brian. Sam shakes his hand. Brian, the restaurateur who doesn't satisfy her in bed. I'll see you tomorrow, Catherine says as Sam steps inside. Will you be dining with us tonight? The girl at the podium asks. She's young and blonde, tattoos, very pretty. An art student is his guess, with a piercing hidden somewhere under her clothing, the type he once would have assuredly had in bed by 10 tonight. No, Sam says, just a quick drink. The bar is crowded with recent transplants from the city, sharing plates of roasted Brussels sprouts and $9 pickles. Sam makes his way toward the empty stool near hers, allowing his elbow to graze her arm as he passes. Her purse is resting on the stool between them, and Sam bumps one of its legs as he sits, hard enough to knock it to the floor. Sorry, he says, reaching for it. She smiles as she takes it from him, hooks it under the bar, and returns to her book. What'll it be? The bartender asks. Johnny Walker Blue, Sam says. Neat. A man with expensive taste, says the bartender, as Sam pulls a credit card from his wallet. My favorite kind. And I'd like to buy this woman a drink, he says, for her inconveniencing her purse like that. She smiles tersely. That's nice of you, but my purse is fine. No, I insist, Sam says. What are you drinking? She hesitates, takes stock of him. Okay, fine, she says. Gin martini, 5 olives. A martini? I would have pegged you more as a rosé drinker. How gendered of you, she said. But you know what they say about martinis. He's learned to observe people unobtrusively, a professional necessity that allows him to see that underneath the white tank top she's wearing, a pale pink bra with lace trim, that the skin on her shoulders glistens. No, what do they say about martinis? Sam asks her. The proper union of gin and vermouth is a great and sudden glory. It is one of the happiest marriages on earth and one of the shortest lived. The bartender sets her drink in front of her. That's Bernard DeVoto, she said, historian and essayist. Sam nods down at her book. Is that what you're reading? She flashes him the cover, revealing a dark image of a woman in silhouette. No, this is the latest psychological thriller, the one everyone's talking about. Any good, he asks. Good enough. Another unreliable female narrator. I'm getting a little tired of the way women are being depicted in fiction right now, to be honest. Oh, and how's that? Sam asks. Oh, you know, she says, that we're prone to neurosis and or hysteria, and our judgment shouldn't be trusted. thus legitimizing the hegemonic idea of masculinity and men's dominant position in society, and by doing so, justifying the subordination of women. She picks up her glass and returns to her book. Anyway, thanks for the drink. Sam allows her to read one more page before leaning in. Hey, smarty pants, you visiting for the weekend? No, she says, turning the page. I live here. You're kidding, he says. Chestnut Hill, New York is a small town. I think I would have remembered seeing you. I'm new. She looks up at him. I moved here last month from New York. A cityette, I believe we're called by the locals. She slides an olive from the plastic stirrer with her teeth, and he's imagining how salty her lips taste when he feels a hand on his shoulder. It's Reggie Meyer, the pharmacist. His wife, Natalie, is Sam's patient. She thinks Reggie smells like salami. Natalie's not feeling well, Reggie says. I'm bringing home some soup. Tell her I hope she feels better. I will, Dr. Statler, thanks. A doctor, the woman says after Reggie has left. Let me guess. She looks him up and down. You're a podiatrist. I'm flattered, but no, I'm a psychologist. She laughs. You're a psychologist? What, you don't believe me? Sam reaches for his wallet and pulls out a business card. Weird, she says, reading the card. I would have sworn you were a podiatrist. So, you want to analyze me? What makes you think I haven't already, he says. She closes her book and turns to face him finally. Okay, and? You're smart, he says, confident. An only child is my guess. Very good, doctor. 2 devoted parents, private school, at least 1 graduate degree, probably 2. Sam pauses. You've also had to become adept at shouldering the burdens of being an exceptionally beautiful woman in the world. She rolls her eyes. Wow, that was bad. Perhaps, he says, but I'm serious. I would bet if you were to survey every man in this place about who they'd want to take home tonight, 100% of them would say you. 99%, she corrects him. The bartender would say you. Constantly being on the receiving end of the male gaze can have an effect, Sam continues. We refer to it as objectification theory. Her face softens. So it's like a thing? For some people, yes. Do you think I should get a therapy dog? Are you kidding? Sam says. A hot girl with a dog? That'll just make matters worse. She smiles. Did you come up with all of this while you were walking behind me up the hill, staring at my ass? Or was it while you were standing outside, watching me through the window? I was on a phone call, Sam says, uncomfortable. Existential crisis that needed immediate attention. Well, that's too bad, she says, because I was hoping you were out there building up the courage to come hit on me. She keeps her eyes on his as she lifts another olive to her lips and sucks the pimento out of the center. And there it is, the feeling he's been chasing like a drug since he was 15 years old. The thrill of knowing he's about to plant his stake into a beautiful woman. You do have an exceptional ass, Sam says. Yes, I know. She looks down at his Johnny Walker Blue. Speaking of exceptional, I've heard good things about this drink of yours. May I? She holds it up to the light and studies the color before lifting it to her lips and draining the glass. You're right. That is a good drink. She leans in close, the scent of whiskey on her breath. If you weren't a married local therapist, I'd invite you inside my mouth for a taste. How do you know I'm married? He asks, the heat rising on the back of his neck. You're wearing a wedding band, she says. He slips his hand into his pocket. Says who?
Who? All right. That's you feel the heat coming off the page there. There's so much there, that small town, the cityets, which I love that phrase. But I love the quote where she says about the psychological suspense that I'm getting a little tired of the way women are being depicted right now. So when I read that, I immediately, amongst wondering many other things, what was going to happen with these 2 people, I wondered if you had put that in there because you were planning to, are you trying to subvert or change our expectations of how crime novels are written and how women are treated in them?
Yeah, I mean the whole like sort of process of birthing this book is like a pretty complicated one because I published my debut novel, The Perfect Mother, and the publisher, I was in the very sort of envious position that the publisher wanted to actually, they were wanting another book from me, which was unusual and I was not expecting. And so I ended up selling them a version of this book on, after writing 100 pages or something.
No.
And so it was the same theory where it was the same idea where it was a man and a woman, and it was Sam and Annie, and he was the therapist, and they move upstate, and he opens an office in the basement of his house, and Annie is upstairs listening. And she was a character who you couldn't trust. You didn't know if she was crazy. Her kind of thing was that she was grieving. She was grieving the loss of like her very best friend. And so it had sort of really screwed with her. And, so the whole premise was like, can you or can you not believe what she's telling you? And at the time, Me Too was happening. So, and I was really, very interested in watching what was that and how important it was, and how many women were coming forward and not being believed. And I just was actually like having a really hard time returning to writing, because it was like I was like, oh my god, here's this other character. And it's and I was reading a lot of thrillers, and I'm often sent thrillers to Blurb, which is very nice, but I was feeling very unsettled about this idea of like, can I portray another woman in popular literature that is somebody who is like, like we just can't trust her word.
Right.
And so, and the ending wasn't working. Like I was just really struggling with it. And it was 3 weeks before the deadline. And I was like so bad.
The heart of a writer goes pitter patter.
And this idea came in, which eventually became exactly what Goodnight Beautiful was, which was that it was the same premise, but every character was different. And so again, like, we could have a conversation maybe like when people have read the book, and it'd be fun to talk about, but it was these characters, and it was like, it hit me pretty hard. And it was like 10 o'clock on June 5th, and my book was due July 1st.
Oh, wow.
And I emailed my agent, and I was like, it's going to go away. It's going to go away. Like, this is not going to be a thing. I don't have to worry about this. And like an hour later, I emailed my agent, was like, hypothetically speaking, you sell a book and then you decide you're going to throw it all away right before it's published, because and she didn't respond. And then I was like texting her. And then by 4 o'clock, I was like, you need to answer your phone. This is a problem. And so we had to like sit down with the publisher and, and explain kind of like that I wasn't going to write that book, because it just, for many reasons, it didn't feel like the right book to be writing.
That's really brave. And
yeah,
courageous.
At the time, I knew that it meant like publishing a book during a global pandemic, like or like the worst election. I'd be like, no, it's fine.
Let's go with that other book.
Yeah, no problem. I got no problem. Yeah,
that's a great story. As a writer, I appreciate that. It takes a lot of courage to have the courage of your convictions and know. And I know what you're talking about, that sense of, do you want to reinforce a narrative of women not being believed or women not being unreliable at a time when what that can mean? Yeah. How much longer did it take you to turn in the next draft or the
it was funny, because then we like set up this lunch with my editor. I think it was like Monday, like, and it was this call to her that was like, we kind of need to talk and we should probably meet in person. And so, I had outlined this over the weekend. I think I wrote 50 pages. Like, I was just like, here's this new idea. And it's really coming easy to me. It didn't continue to be easy to me. But when we sat down with her, she was like, I agree. This is the way to go. And then we were like, we need another year, and when she was like, oof. And I think I really needed longer than that, because it still was like a pretty hard book to write. But she went back to Harper, and she kind of had to get the buy-in from the publisher, and everybody was super generous and gave me the time that I needed in order to like pursue this. And, so thank God, I think it did turn out to be like a better book.
I think you made the right choice. I mean, I'm sure the first book would have been very good as well. So I read your first book. I read The Perfect Mother and really enjoyed it, and that was great. But I think when you have that thought that that no, that's not right, it is better to honor that and go forward. And it's a brilliant book. So you made the right choice, and good that your editor and agent supported you in that. And I assume your family. Were you still in New York City? I was going to ask about or had you moved to the country?
No, it's funny, like the whole writing of this book, which is probably why I set them upstate, because I really was ready to leave New York, which I never thought that I was ever going to feel ready to leave New York. But we had 2 little kids who were probably, what are they now? So they were probably like 4 and 5 at the time.
Wow.
And I just was like, oh, I'm over it. And I was really happy to have that feeling, because I love New York so much. I was like, oh, shoot, I'm going to be stuck here forever, because I never want to leave. But so I was able to conjure up this, small kind of New Englandy town. And then I was like having all these, like, I have to rent an Airbnb in Hudson for the weekend by myself. It's research, tax write-up.
The research claim, right?
Yeah. So
you hit a certain, and you couldn't, I don't think you could have planned this, but the feeling of these 2 characters moving up from the city into a small town. You have hit a moment where there are many people fleeing New York or leaving New York and moving up into the country. And your first book, of course, was set in the city. So what is different about setting, or what drew you to the small town setting for this particular book? Why is this particular book? I think we can hear that in that first chapter, that here is Sam running into his patients in a way that he never would have. And you have a great wealth of small town characters. So what did you think about setting this in a small town? What did that demand?
Well, I think because it was one of the things from reading a lot of thrillers and stuff, like I wanted to specifically make it the man that had disappeared and not the woman. And, if a guy in New York disappeared, you wouldn't know it. It wouldn't matter. But like here, setting it in a small town, there's a lot of, after he's missing, his wife is convinced that something happened to him because she feels like she truly knows him and that he was deeply in love with her. But everybody in town who knew him in high school is saying, like, there's no way that he just left. Like he's with somebody cuter right now. That's the answer to this. And so, I sort of needed it to be there so that so that there was intrigue around a man missing. And it is kind of interesting, like, I did some research when I was starting this about men who go missing. And it's a whole different, like, event when a guy goes missing than a woman. And especially like an attractive white woman, right? Like that's like international news, and there's a thing about it. And we have this, like, everybody's really interested in that. And when a guy goes missing, it really is kind of this barely mentioned, and when you would have to kind of search pretty hard to see if there was ever a resolution to, like, the guy in Detroit. Yeah. And, and I think the assumption is sort of like, if a guy goes missing, it's because he's found something else.
He's run away. And to have that tension between what the people in the town think has happened and what she, newly married to him and not knowing him very well, thinks happen. It creates a great tension. Also, you've avoided I guess we can all, the book that, of course, we think of is Gone Girl, and the unreliable narrator. And that could have been the book that she was reading or at the bar or thinking about. And you have allusions to a number of books in the course of your book. And I wonder, there's one in particular, and I don't necessarily want to give away which it is. It's kind of a horror book instead of a suspense book. But so I wondered how you used allusions to other books, or what other books you were thinking about, or, however you are comfortable talking about that. What were you directly responding to those other books, like Gone Girl, or the other book that gets?
I mean, I'm talking about the other book. Do you think it's okay? I mean, I feel like it's not that much of a. I mean, I'm just.
It's fine with me. I didn't.
But I mean, in some ways, this book is an homage to Misery by Stephen King, and I didn't set out to do that. But when in the story, like, it came to that, I was like, yes, I went right to that book. It was one of the books I remember in fifth grade. We had silent reading hour, and my teacher, Mr. Sadowski, was like, you can bring in your own books to read. And like, I don't know what everybody else was reading, like, Beatrice and Ramona. And this is not to say that I was like some super precocious kid, but
you were reading Misery.
I was reading Misery because I like love the books. And I really remember like the minute he was like walking around, like he was kind of stern, but also super nice. And like his hands behind his back and like my little Catholic school. And he like kind of picked it up and he looked at it and I was like, oh shit. Like I'm and he kind of just looked at me and like nodded once, like, okay, carry on, And very randomly, I met his niece at a soccer game last year for my my teacher.
No, your teacher. I was going to Stephen King sees.
I know, but like that teacher, and I actually said to her, like, I'm in the middle of writing this book, and like, if you ever like talk to your uncle, like, just let him know that I really feel like it was his quiet nod that like has led to me like writing this book, because it just like blew open like everything for me, like reading and storytelling and novels.
It's interesting that was the book that kind of turned.
Yeah, it's a weird. I mean, that in a tree grows in Brooklyn, but we sent
three different books.
Sort of like both, like really adult themes, like like
they do,
right? Like crazy, like yeah. But so we sent Stephen King a copy of this book. And my agent called me and she's like, okay, I got his address. Like, let's like put it in the mail tonight. And I was like, you think I'm just gonna like? She's like, write a note and send it off tonight. And I'm like, you think I'm just gonna sit down and like whip off a note to Stephen King? And I was like,
lifetime.
So I wrote him this letter, and then as soon as I sent it, I was like, oh shoot, I should have said something else. But yeah, so it is. I mean, I feel like he's not somebody. And there are some reviews who are like, don't try and do Stephen King. And I was like, no, I get it. I really get it. But
you managed to do the illusion and bring that book in without doing it as Stephen. But it doesn't feel at all derivative or imitation. It feels like an illusion and taking it somewhere very different.
Yeah, that's good. And it's it's like Sam is reading. Sam is reading the book Misery in the novel, and Annie actually teaches a class called Misery and Womanhood. And, like at first, like, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't wait. Like this class is about like all the reasons women are unhappy, like misery and womanhood. And then it turns out that it's actually a look at, feminism and the novel Misery and stuff. So, I mean, it's in there, so.
Yeah, no, it all. And I think when something like that all comes together, then that was the right one. Did you always know that you would write the suspense or I'm not sure if you want psychological suspense, or I feel like this is, especially with all the psychology in it, that we have a therapist. This really fits psychological suspense.
Psychological suspense because no, and I actually wrote nonfiction for 15 years.
You wrote a biography, right?
Yeah, and I was a ghostwriter, so I wrote a ton of books for people who, like, I wrote memoirs for famous people who then, said that they wrote the book, which is what the job is. And so I didn't know, and I didn't actually read a lot of suspense, but I mean, it's so cliche, but I really, after my second daughter was born, I hadn't been reading for a long time. I had two kids quick, and then I picked up Gone Girl, and I was like, oh, like, this reading can be fun. I tend to read things that are kind of way more literary and heavy and like, oh, that was hard work and also really enjoyable. But I think it felt like, oh, I can attempt this. And I don't know why, but I don't know. I think suspense comes a little bit natural to me. So I want to move away from it a little bit too and try something else. I don't know. I think I'm sort of wanting to explore different things, but yeah.
Well, speaking of the psychology, I mean, you have this character, Sam, who's a therapist, and there are, not to give anything away, but some psychological analyses towards the end that are really well done. What kind of research did you have to do to get that so accurately?
Well, my husband is a therapist.
So you didn't have to go to a B&B in Hudson for that research.
Yeah, which is always like the weird thing to admit, because then people are like, so you role play? So how much, right? So how much of this is like,
interesting.
I mean, and it's funny, like the excuse me, like the germination of this book was that, like, what was it now, 15 years ago or something, I was living in New York and I decided that I wanted to see a therapist for the first time, which was not something that, being an Irish Catholic, like, did. Like, you weren't like, my parents weren't like, oh, you have problems, go to a therapist. They were like, make some food, or like, and so I went to the one guy that I knew whose name was Mark, and he's a therapist. And I was like, how do you find a therapist? And he said, you should go to my therapist. She's amazing. And Judith. And so I went to her, and, I said, I don't think this is weird that Mark and I know Mark, because he'll never be a issue. Like, I barely know him. I'm never going to talk about him in therapy. And then like 3 years later, I'm still seeing her. And I develop a crush on Mark, and we're both still seeing her. And so I had this idea that I was going to like hide in the closet and wait for him to like come to his session so that I could then, listen in on and figure out if he liked me too. To my credit, I did not do.
Okay.
But then we eventually started dating, and I was like, I had this hilarious idea that I was going to like hide in the bathroom and then I wasn't writing fiction. I was writing nonfiction, but one of us was like, that would be a funny novel. And we would go through these whole things of like, what would the person do? And it wasn't a creepy thriller like it turned out to be, but so fast forward later, like 15 years, we're now married with 2 kids.
Okay. So it all worked out without having to go in the closet. Well, that brings me to another question I had, because there is this voyeurism that occurs in it, because somebody does listen in on the therapy sessions. So there, there's also obsession, because that character somewhat becomes obsessed with what they are hearing in the therapy session. So voyeurism and obsession. Do you think it's interesting to write about those, or why are you drawn to those? And actually, the part of my question is, do you think they're essential characteristics for a writer? Asking for a friend.
That's yeah. I mean, I think it's yes. And I think like there's so much about, I feel like right now we're in this, like, we're just like bombarded with voyeurism, social media. And it's like, it's so sanctioned. Like, it's not only is it okay to kind of be a voyeur into other people's lives, but it's encouraged, because the more I show you, the more you like what I posted.
We're looking at each other's living rooms, assuming that's not a fake background.
Oh, I know. Like the whole Zoom thing. I mean, my husband actually, who, is still a therapist, he's seeing people on Zoom. He's like, it's crazy, because you like, now you're like actually in like your patient's like, living room or kitchen or something. And it's a whole new, like, input into their life. And so I do think I'm not great at social media, but I think it's an interesting thing to kind of, to think about. And, and it was funny, because when I was writing The Perfect Mother, which was about a group of women who join a mommy group when their kids are 6 weeks old, and they would get together. And I started to write it, and my daughter was 1, and I felt that she was still like a newborn, but I realized in starting to write it, like, I couldn't remember anything about what it was like to have a 6-week-old.
That you have this convenient amnesia. I think it's an adaptive response that you forget what it was.
Would never have another kid. But I knew that there was like this coffee shop bar just down the street from me where there were these mommy groups. And so I would go with my computer and just like really like be very close to them, and, kind of like be eavesdropping on them and recording what they were saying, which felt really creepy. Like it felt like it almost mirrored like what was happening.
As a woman who considered going into a closet to listen to.
Yeah, maybe I do. Maybe I should still be seeing Judith, the therapist. We got married, and I ended up losing her in the marriage, because I was like, at this point, I think we can no longer see the same
therapist.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I love that. I think that's one of the things I miss now is, not the writing in cafes and being able to listen.
Yeah. Is that where you do your writing mostly? Like,
I mostly do my writing at home at my desk, but I liked in another lifetime to occasionally go to a cafe and write. And I loved taking the train down to the city and writing on Amtrak. So.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting.
Yeah. As long as I was able to get a seat that did not have somebody talking anywhere near me.
Were headphones or no headphones?
No headphones. I probably should have had headphones. If I'm ever going to take Amtrak again, I will do. I probably shouldn't.
Isn't it weird to think about that you're just like on a train with like other people and like a guy handing out water bottles and you're like, sure, I'll accept this water bottle from a stranger and drink it.
Nope. Yeah, and I have a chronic cough, so I don't think anyone wants me on a train in a long time. Well, I'm also wanted to ask you about what you're writing next, but also, how has it been? Have you been able to write in the pandemic? We talked a little bit about this before. What's it like? I know you have young children. That makes it really difficult.
Yeah.
To work.
Yeah. I mean, this book was really hard for me to write, I think, on many levels. Like, one is the plot is complicated. And so I think it took a lot of the fun out of it because it was like doing a chess puzzle, like playing chess every day with somebody that was better than me. And so, and also just life, and we moved in the middle of it. And so my husband and I were like, we just got to get to March 1st, which is when everything was going to be done, and it was like March 1st. He was in New York half the week working. My kids were in school full time. We just moved. We bought our first house. We had no furniture. And I was like, oh, I can't wait. March 1st. I'm just going to like look at Pinterest all day and like buy cups and like, and then it was like, or like the world's going to shut down and like nobody's ever going to leave ever again. And so, and then it was weird because then my kids were completely out of school up until October 10th. Which is then the book published on October 13th. So it was like this whole stretch between finishing it and it being published that nobody was ever not around me.
Yeah.
And in some ways I'm like, oh, thank God, because if I had to actually work during that time, it just was hard. So, but the good thing, I guess, is that I do have an idea. And instead of like, I'm somebody who kind of can get pretty obsessed and like, with the story and like kind of go away and be like in both places. And I can't do that now. Like I just am more with my family and escape. And it's nice because I feel like when I do get to write, it feels a little bit freer. Like I'm not writing a commercial thing, or I'm not writing for a publisher or even an audience because I don't know what's going to come of this because it's not, the rules are all different. Trying, like, it feels a little bit more like private and personal. And, and I think a second novel is, you've written like 5 million, so you probably
20 something.
What is it like at that point? I'm so curious. Like, I would rather just like, how do you, like, I don't know. I have so many questions for you. Do you still feel like, do you feel more confident? Like, do you still, when you start a book, are you like, are you feel like this is
it's always a new, it always might as well be the first one. There are some things I suppose you just can look back and go like, oh, I know I've had a problem before. But every book is different, and you have to learn how to write that book.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing from you is everything, this has changed our climate so much that, what we write next we're writing it for a different world. So I think that sense of retreating and just writing for yourself is an important one to have right now.
Yeah.
To sort of reinvent. The world is going to be reinvented, that we might as well reinvent our book. So no, it doesn't. I don't think you get confident.
I know you were writing during this. So are you like, how are you dealing with writing this in?
I did write it in, and I know that I think I read an article in one of the first weeks of the pandemic that said, now is not the time to write your pandemic novel. I really hate people telling me what to do. So I was like, that's what I'm going to do. But I had been struggling to write a book for about a year that was set on an island and I off the coast of Maine. And I had never quite figured out why they were there. And suddenly I was like, oh, okay, I know where.
Oh my God. Divine intervention.
So I did. I actually put down about 100 pages of a book that I put aside and started writing something different in March.
Have you done that before?
Yeah, I have done that once or twice. So the only thing you have from, I think, having written a number of books is you know that you can that can happen in the middle of a book.
Yeah.
And you bet you're probably going to have to put that aside and start all over, and that's okay, although very scary.
Yeah, it's scary. Well, and what what I'm realizing now in that, in this next idea is that a lot of the book that I threw away, like it was the characters that were wrong, but they're the characters that were supposed to be in this story.
Yeah.
So, so like I can't take any paragraphs, but I think I know the people because they were just in the wrong story. So
yeah,
I mean, hopefully like all that work you do, it's all for something.
It comes in somewhere. It does. Yeah. If not, it's actually taking pieces of text, but you've gone through that process in your head, and it'll come out.
Yeah.
In something else. So
yeah.
I think
a lot of these thriller writers are doing a book a year, and I mean, like my hats off to them. But like, it's like I couldn't.
Well, you have 2 small children too, which is, I think, makes it a lot harder.
It gets easier, is what you're saying.
and yet, your first book is about a mother, so it's not as if children, are not a good thing to have as a writer. What do you, as somebody who has written about being a mother, what do you think about the intersection of being a mother and being a writer?
I don't know. I mean, it's funny because it took me having kids to like finally have the courage to try fiction, which is what I always wanted to do. But I was, it was really, nonfiction seemed like you could do that. Like you could find a story and then you could figure out a way to tell it. And there's a beginning, a middle, and end. And, so I wrote a ton of nonfiction books, but fiction just felt like I would never have the courage to do it. And, I do think that there was something particular about the fact that a lot of my work was ghostwriting.
Mm-hmm.
It was having people then like take a book that I'd written and say that they had written it, which is just like this bizarre thing that happens in publishing.
Mm.
I think I'd gotten to a point, and possibly it was because I had 2 daughters now, that I was like, no, you have to like make sure your voice is your own. And, there was something I think that was starting to feel like less like appealing to me about doing that. Mm-hmm. And the only place to go with that was to write fiction. It was what I wanted to do. And so I sort of said to everybody, like the kids and the husband, like, I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to take another job, and I'm going to take the money that I made from my last job, my ghostwriting job, and I'm just going to we're going to hire a sitter, and like, we're all working equal hours now, and like, everyone's got to get used to it. And I don't care if you're complaining, like, we're just 1 year. I have 1 year to do this, and
so you set yourself a time limit.
Yeah. And I think I needed that because it was like, every day, like I had to like get up and write, and I had to like, because time was kind of running out before I had to like take paying work and stuff. So, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know if I would have had the courage otherwise.
Well, I think that's a good focus too. I think I was writing when my daughter was little, and when I started out, I would have like very small little sections of time where she was had a babysitter or was napping. And so writer's block just sort of goes out the window. I have this time to write. I'm going to sit down and write something.
Yeah. It's so annoying. Do you think there's a lot of like men like having this conversation? Wow, like John Grisham, how did you do it?
I do think there are men who are probably who are writers who are caring for their children, but I do not hear the conversation as much. And I'm glad to see more women who are mothers in writing. When I first went to an MFA program, I was the only person in it who had children.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. And so I did think, I guess the women who have children at home probably don't have the time to go do this MFA program at the same time.
Yeah.
So.
And there's, I think that there's just something like incredibly desperate about having kids. Like it's like it just breaks you apart in a way that you're like, there's a lot if you're a writer, there's so much to mine there, and so much to talk about.
Yeah. Well, and I think it enriches your writing and does give you a sense of doing this for the next generation.
Yeah. Yeah. I do recommend like writing a book called The Perfect Mother when you have children, because like I tell them that it's a memoir, and so,
you tell them that.
And they're like, what is it about? I was like, it's just about me,
How perfect I am.
We went into we stumbled across a little tiny library that was open for browsing nearby, like a couple last week, and my daughters go in, and they're always like really excited if we go into a new bookstore to like find the perfect mother. They don't really know about Goodnight Beautiful yet, and they went up to the librarian, and my little, what is she? She's 6, and she was like, my mom is the perfect mother. Like, can you look up that book? And she, like, the librarian played along, like, sure, no problem. I didn't want to tell her that I actually like did have a book called
The Perfect Mother.
Sweet,
honey. A good reminder to entitle your books in a way that you would like to be described yourself.
Exactly.
Perfect Mother.
My next one is called like Very Hot at 50.
There you go. I think that's a whole new, I can see a whole cozy section of books entitled like that.
Series.
I saw that we moved over a little bit, and I wondered if that was Helen coming back with whether there were questions that we had in the chat, but I'll wait.
We do. We actually have 3 questions. Can I feed those to you?
Yes.
We have, you said you like to read thrillers. Who are the authors who influenced you the most, would you say? Besides Stephen King, obviously.
I don't know. It's funny. I feel like my influences are weirdly not, thriller writers, except for Gillian Flynn, which again, it's like, oh my God, snore, like everybody was. But I thought that book, if I was in charge of like the National Book Award, I would have considered Gone Girl. Like, I think that never really got the kind of critical acclaim that it deserved. Right? So smart. And
it is a smart book.
And so, and I feel like, the books, at least in the beginning, I feel that influenced me to write fiction were more like books about motherhood that were quiet, like Jenny Offal, Department of Speculation. Like, it's the total opposite of a thriller. It's like snippets and barely paragraphs and not a ton of plot. And, and then I was reading the book 11 Hours by Pamela Aarons, which is also like a very quiet book about motherhood. And, I don't know. I have this, like, I feel like my influences are more about language and prose, like than it is about story. Because I don't know. There's something about story. Like I think I have the story, but where I struggle is like the poetry of it. And so, so I kind of, The God of Small Things is next to me, which is probably that is most marked up because I think that she's such a beautiful writer. And I don't know. It's a weird. It's like it's a mix of it.
Have you read Weather by Jenny Offal?
I can't do it. I want to read it, but she wrote her. It's not her second book, is it? But it's her second book after The Purpose.
It's not a scare. It's deep, but it is.
Yeah, it's about climate change and like the impact on her 16-year-old, and and. Oh, I feel like I have a marriage and what?
It's also about a disintegration of a marriage, and it's all it's good. It's I avoided it for a long time, and then dove in. I think you'd enjoy it as well.
I know. I do have a stack of books that I feel like if the election goes the way that we would like it to go, and it needs to go, then there are books that like that one about climate change that I can never read. Yeah. And like existential dystopia is, we got enough of that, right?
Right. And we have another question. Who is your favorite character in the book? They're all so different.
Oh, and Goodnight Beautiful. What I can say now is I don't know. I like them all. I like Annie. And I think partly because I feel like I gave up a book, like I threw away a book in order to be able to write her. She's this sassy and smart, and she's with this great guy who's hot and well, she thinks successful, and but she's just like not impressed at all by or by the marriage, and it's a little bit, I think, like it's unusual. Like you feel like it's the woman who's always like, oh my God, I'm so happy I have this guy and I have to keep him and I have to do these things to keep him interested. But the roles are really reversed. And, they have this tradition of celebrating every week of marriage, because like every Tuesday they celebrate another week. And I think you might assume that that's her idea because that's a very girly thing to do. But you learn that it's him who wants to, it's his idea because he's just so psyched that she's married to him. And she's like, oh, and she kind of puts up with it. But in the same way, like she's very much in love and she's very tender and stuff. And we're talking a little bit now about trying to adopt this into a movie. And I would be the one to, like, this is the first one that I'm talking about doing the adaptation for. And I'm really, one of the things I'm really excited about is like bringing somebody like Annie to the screen, you know, like somebody who's kind of like ballsy, like a really courageous woman.
Yeah, a strong female that you don't. He was not. I'm rereading Rebecca right now, and it's such a nervous. It's a great book, but it's also such a nervous and self-effacing character. And to have a character who has more confidence, who's able to say hegemonic in conversation. I was like, goodness, I got that right to saying it now, but
I stumbled over it and I wrote it.
So she is a great character.
Yeah, I mean, Rebecca is an interesting one, right? Because you don't even know her. Do we know her name?
No, we never know her name. She is the second Mrs. De Winter.
Yeah, fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't even know her name.
Yeah.
That's a great book.
It is a great book.
And actually, aren't they making something?
It's a new miniseries with the woman from Downton Abbey, Lily James, is that?
Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I did just rewatch the Hitchcock because I'm teaching a class on the Gothic novel and I gave it to my class to watch. So,
and how is that all holding up? Like I'm nervous about watching the Rebecca series because I love that book so much. But
I don't know what the series will be like, but the Hitchcock movie holds up really well. So if you can always go back and rewatch that.
Okay, I need new stuff.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think. Was there another question?
There was a third one up here, and that was really enjoyed reading your nonfiction books, particularly Rosewater. Do you plan to write more nonfiction? Will you take a break and kind of hit nonfiction and then go back to fiction, or do you have to be in like one headspace and continue?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really like nonfiction. You know, I like having the story there that you don't have to work it all out. And you know, I do have some ideas for nonfiction, but I feel like my nonfiction was at least at the end of my nonfiction career was a lot about what was happening in the developing world. And so I did a lot of travel, like to Western Africa, and you know, so like, you know, I was pregnant during a lot of this and stuff, and not just because of the pandemic, but just because of my life right now. I can't imagine that, but I was saying this to my husband recently. I think once the kids are like old enough, whatever age that is, like 8 and 9, like that I'm like, okay, you all can survive, like whatever, like you'll be fine. And then I can see kind of returning really very happily, like running back to a nonfiction book. But I don't know. I'm hoping this right now. I'm kind of focused on like this. If I could try and write a screenplay for Goodnight Beautiful, I think that's what I feel ready for now. But I'm always wanting to, I think, try different mediums and that, you know, not kind of like just keep trying different new things.
It's good to do different things here and there. And was the Perfect Mother, was that also optioned for?
It was, yeah. I mean, I think that now it's just nothing is happening. Like
that's right.
But and I wasn't going to do the screenplay for that one. I think because you know, it was my debut. And have you thought, Carol, about doing like screenwriting at all or exploring that?
It really hasn't come up, or I haven't felt really I've shifted around in different genres and instead, where I've written some fantasy and young adult books. I would like to, actually, I'm looking at adapting something that I wrote right now for a podcast. So it is good to think about, well, how would the scene play out if you had to do it only through dialogue and, you know, what you hear. So I think it's a challenge to try. It stretches you.
Yeah. And I mean, writing a novel, I actually find like really not that enjoyable until it's over with. So I think like now I'm just like, oh, I mean, I have this idea and it is kind of plaguing me. So I know I'll get there, but I'm, not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
So I'm going to put one last call out to the people who are watching. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat module, or you can ask a question at the bottom of your screen. And if we do not have any more, I'm going to thank you guys. That was amazing. That was such an interesting conversation. Thank you, Aimee. Thank you for writing a great book, A, and B, joining us this evening, and both of you for pinch hitting. And I'm really sad if Nicola is watching this, or we'll send her the tape anyway. Hi, Nicola. We're really
loved your book.
We'll do it another time. But wishing you lots of success with the book, Aimee. I hope it's
absolutely.
Good luck with the screenplay. Thank you, Carol, for moderating. Thank you, everyone.
And also, there's a lot of signed books at Oblong. So if people went today and signed them, so I've been talking to my friends, get them from Oblong.
Thank you. Thank you.
Get all your books from Oblong.
Press that button; it takes you straight to Aimee's page, and you can buy your book. You can pick it up curbside, or we'll mail it to you. So we'll get it to you. And thanks to Harper for making it happen too, to Leslie Cohen. So good night, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks, Oblong.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.